The snow had not fallen yet, but the sky was swollen with it. Low gray clouds hung over the plains like a lid pressed too tight, trapping in the cold, and a silence that seemed to deepen with every mile of open land. A single wagon creaked down the rutted road, the wood groaning with every turn of the wheel. The horses' ribs, faint beneath their dusty coats, moved with a kind of resignation. They did not need the whip. They knew the pace of sorrow. She sat hunched on the driver's bench, clutching a frayed shawl around her shoulders, the wind needling through the thin fabric like nails through burlap. Her face was worn, skin cracked, and wind-chapped mouth drawn in a line that hadn't bent into a smile in weeks. Behind her in the rattling bed of the wagon were her children. 7 of them. The youngest, not more than a year, whimpered now and then, a soft breath of sound under the wagon tarp. The older ones said little, their hunger and weariness braided too tightly around their tongues. They'd come looking for a place called Mercy. What they'd found was a town called Marlow, pressed flat against the prairie, barely more than a spit of wood and grit. When she'd knocked on doors offering her husband's tools, her own hands, anything in trade for bread or milk or a patch of floor, the doors hadn't opened. Or if they had, it was just enough to say, "We got mouths of our own." Her husband was gone, died in Dakota when the fever came through. They'd buried him beneath a fence post, the only marker she could find. Then she hitched the wagon and pointed it south toward whatever might come next. She didn't expect welcome, but she hadn't expected nothing. Her fingers trembled as she pulled the shawl tighter. Her stomach was a hollow drum, but she was past feeling it now. Hunger had become a kind of quiet companion, one she didn't bother to fight. Just after dusk, she pulled the wagon off the road and into a patch of dry grass half hidden by a knoll. The children were already asleep or pretending to be. She climbed down, boots crunching on frost-stiff weeds, and walked a short distance to where the land dropped into a shallow draw. There she stood. The cold settled on her like a second skin. She looked up, her breath rising in thin white ghosts. Nothing but dark sky, no stars. No sign, no voice. Just that aching quiet. Her eyes burned, and still she would not cry. She was not made for breaking. Behind her the faint sound of hoofbeats reached her ears. She turned slow, already wary. A man on horseback emerged from the edge of the road, silhouetted against the pale twilight. He rode like he'd done it forever, easy and the saddle reins loose. Not a lawman, not a preacher, just a man with a face worn by weather and years. He didn't call out, just rode up slow and stopped a little ways off, tipping his hat without a smile. "You setting camp here?" he asked. She said nothing, just stared, shoulders tight. "You got no fire, no cover." His voice was low, calm. "Cold's gonna kill those young ones faster than hunger." She squared her jaw. "Town wouldn't have us." He nodded like he'd already figured as much. Looked back toward the wagon, then at her again. "I got space in my barn. It ain't warm, but it's better than this." Still, she didn't answer, didn't move. "I ain't asking for anything," he added. "Just don't see sense in watching folks freeze when I got room." Silence stretched long between them. The wind picked up, shivering through the weeds. She glanced toward the wagon, thought of the smallest ones, their tiny hands clutching at blankets too thin for the season. Then she nodded. Once. He dismounted, led the horse by the bridle, and walked beside her back to the wagon. She climbed up, roused the children. They said nothing, just looked at the stranger with wide, sunken eyes. He said nothing back, only helped guide the horses while she drove. The barn sat at the edge of his land, sagging a little under its own weight, but standing strong. Inside, the straw was dry, and there were blankets piled in the corner. She laid the children down, covered them as best she could. One of them reached for her hand and didn't let go. Outside, the man stood by the door, watching the night. He didn't ask her name. She didn't ask his. But she looked at him long before turning back to her children. In that quiet space between survival and surrender, something had shifted. Not hope, not yet. But the cold had been held at bay for a night. Morning came slow, slipping through the slats of the barn in threads of weak light. It painted the children's cheeks pale gold and turned the straw into something almost beautiful. She woke with the youngest curled against her chest, his breath warm beneath her chin. The others were still asleep, tangled together in a heap of limbs and quiet dreams. Her back ached from the hard ground. Her boots were still damp, but for the first time in weeks she hadn't shivered through the night. She stepped outside. The frost had crusted over everything: fence posts, wagon wheels, the stiff yellow grass. The land beyond the barn was open and rough fields patched with old snow and stubble. Chickens scratched near a coop and a line of smoke uncurled from a chimney up the hill. He was there, the man from last night, sitting on the porch with a mug in one hand, watching the day begin like it was something sacred. She walked slow up the path, not out of caution anymore, but because her body still moved like it was half buried under weight. She stopped a few steps from the porch. "I should work," she said. He nodded once. "Coffee's hot. Got some bread? Come in when you're ready." He said it like someone who didn't expect anything, didn't push, didn't crowd. Then he stood and walked inside. She stayed there a moment longer, the cold biting at her cheeks. The wind tugged at her skirts, and somewhere far off a bird called a low, lonesome cry that made her throat tighten. Inside the house, the air smelled like wood smoke and iron. The floorboards were scuffed and the furniture was plain, but it was clean. Lived in. There was a chair near the stove. He'd left the mug and a plate for her. She sat, fingers wrapping around the warm ceramic, and let the silence settle between them. "Your man die in the war?" he asked, not unkindly. She shook her head. "Fever. In August. He was laying shingles on a church roof." He nodded again. "You come far?" "From Yankton." He whistled low. "That's a stretch with 7 children and a broken wagon axle." Her eyes snapped to his. "How'd you know about the axle?" "I saw you stop just outside town 2 days back. Figured you were looking for work or pity." He sipped his coffee. "But you didn't ask for either." She stared into her cup. The warmth of it seeped into her palms, but not far enough. "I ain't proud," she said. "Just tired." "That's a fair way to be." He didn't ask more, just stood and pulled on his coat. "You know how to feed stock?" "Yes. You'll find the hay barn behind the corral. There's a lame ewe in the pen, needs watching. Feed the pigs, if you can stomach the stink." She met his eyes again. "You letting us stay for work?" "You don't owe me. But folks ought to earn what they're given when they can." His voice was even quiet. She stood, finished the last of the bread, and stepped outside again. The wind had picked up and clouds still clung to the mountains in the distance. She crossed the yard, arms tucked tight, and found the feed shed without needing to ask. She moved through the morning, slow but steady, her hands remembering work they hadn't done in months. The children stayed close to the barn, chasing chickens and drawing lines in the dirt. He passed by once, tipping his hat to them like they were grown. The oldest, a boy of about 11, watched him long after he'd gone. That night she cooked. Not much: boiled potatoes, beans with a little salt, but she set the table and saw the way he paused in the doorway, surprised. They ate quiet. The children drowsed by the stove. He told her about the land, how he'd come west with his father, how they'd built the house one beam at a time. He didn't say what had happened to the old man. He didn't need to. "Winters are hard here," he said. "I've seen worse." "I don't doubt that." When she stood to clear the plates, he reached out and caught her sleeve, not hard, just enough. "You're welcome to stay. All of you. Not just for the night." Her eyes didn't soften. "Not yet." But they didn't harden either. "We'll earn it," she said. "I reckon you already are." She didn't smile. But she nodded. Outside, the frost was thick again, but inside the barn the children slept warm, curled beneath blankets that had once belonged to someone else. She lay beside them, eyes open, watching the beams above. It wasn't a home. Not yet. But it wasn't the road either. Subscribe and see what tomorrow brings over the ridge. The days settled into a rhythm slow and stubborn like the land itself. Mornings came with a pale light and the scratch of chickens outside the barn. She rose before the children pulled her boots on by feel and stepped into the cold with her sleeves rolled and jaw tight. There was always something to do. Feed to carry, water to haul, fences to walk. She worked in silence most days, not out of pride but out of habit. Words had long ago stopped doing her any good. The man, Wes was his name, though he hadn't offered it right away, didn't push. He moved around her with a kind of quiet respect. He showed her where the tools were kept, which cows were mean, which pump liked to stick in the frost. When her youngest fell sick with a cough, he brought honey in a tin and laid it on the shelf without saying a word. One morning she found the wagon axle, replaced the wheels greased, and a basket tucked beneath the bench with bread and cured meat. She stared at it for a long time, then turned away. She did not thank him. Not yet. Yet. Some debts were too big for words. It was near the end of the second week when she found him in the north field, down on one knee beside a broken fence post. His gloves were off hands, bare to the wind, driving nails into the frozen wood. She saw the way he paused between each swing, shaking out the stiffness, and the way his breath came hard through his nose. She walked over and took the hammer from his hand without asking. "You're favoring your left side," she said. He grunted. "Old break. Horse rolled on me 2 winters back." She set the nail and drove it clean once, then twice. The sound echoed sharp in the still morning. He stood beside her, not offering help, not interfering. "I saw the scar," she said after a while. He didn't answer right away. Just pulled a glove back on. "Ain't much of a story. I was drunk young and thought I could outrun a storm." She looked at him, one eyebrow raised. "I couldn't," he added dry. That night, after the children were asleep, he brought a second chair to the porch and sat beside her. The stars were sharp overhead, cut clean into the black sky. "My wife died 6 years back," he said. "Childbirth." She didn't flinch, just wrapped the shawl tighter. "She's buried near the creek. I didn't want to leave her alone out here, so I stayed. Built more fence. Took in strays. I guess I just got quiet." She nodded. "Quiet's not the worst thing. You." "My man was loud. Drank when he could. Worked when he had to. He didn't hit, not exactly, but he could make a room feel like it was closing in. Wes didn't say anything, but he didn't look away either. I stayed because of the children," she said, "and because there wasn't anywhere else. Then the fever came and he went cold in a week. After that, I just kept moving. The wind moved through the grass below like the ocean in slow motion." She could hear the creak of the barn door, the soft huff of a horse shifting in its stall. "Do they talk about him?" he asked. "The oldest one does. Sometimes. The others. They just watch me." He looked at her hands, cracked red, strong from years of labor. "You're good with them," he said. "They don't need good. They need fed. You do both." She looked away, eyes stinging from the wind. Or maybe not the wind. The next day she found a bag of seed beside the barn and a shovel leaning against the fence. He didn't say anything, but she saw him watching from the porch as she showed the oldest how to turn the soil. Later she caught him laughing with the middle girl, thin, sharp little thing with a habit of picking up every stray feather or stone. He let her tie a ribbon around his wrist, and he wore it through supper like it was nothing. The land was hard, the cold still biting deep, but something had begun to ease between them, not soft exactly, but known. Like 2 rocks, that had learned not to scrape when they leaned. That night after supper, she stood in the doorway with her arms crossed. "You said I didn't owe you?" "I did." "Then why keep helping?" He stood slow, not close, just stood where she could see him. "Because some folks earn their place just by surviving," he said. "And because I ain't used to seeing someone do so much with so little." She didn't cry. She didn't smile. But she stayed. Spring came late that year. The snow didn't melt so much as recede, grudging and slow, leaving behind a patchwork of brown earth and ice-crusted puddles. The ground softened the mornings, stayed lighter a little longer, and the children stopped coughing in their sleep. Life, in its quiet way, started to stitch itself back together. She began planting in earnest. Rows of potatoes, beans, cabbage, each seed pressed into the soil with care. Her hands ached, her knees cracked, but she worked without complaint. The oldest boy learned how to rig a line for the well pump. The younger ones scattered stones from the garden rows. Wes built a gate sturdy and even and let the children paint their handprints along the top rail. The house felt less like someone else's now. There were tin cups on the shelf that hadn't been there before, a bundle of her sewing pinned to the wall, a shawl left draped over the porch rail instead of folded in the wagon. One evening she caught him standing beside the fire holding one of the children's drawings in his hand, a crooked house, a stick figure family scrawled in charcoal. He looked at it like it was a map he didn't know how to read. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked him. "Sometimes," he said, "but I never got far." "Why not?" He shrugged. "The road's long, and I got used to staying still." She understood that. The way standing still could feel like both a comfort and a prison. He came with her to market that Sunday, though he hadn't gone in years. They took a mule cart covered with canvas, and she sold needlework while he traded a coil of rope and half a sack of oats. The town still looked at her with guarded eyes, curious, unsure, but no one turned their back this time. Wes didn't say much, but he stood beside her when the merchant offered less than fair for her clothes. One look from him and the man reconsidered. Afterward they sat on the edge of the square, splitting an apple between them, watching the children chase chickens near the stable fence. "You miss her?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "I do, but it's different now. The missing's quieter." She nodded. "That's the part no one tells you. It doesn't go away. It just stops shouting." That night the children fell asleep, fast worn out from the ride and the excitement of seeing something beyond the farm. She stood on the porch, arms crossed over her chest, and watched the moon rise pale and round above the fields. Wes joined her, a mug in his hand. "They asked me today if we were kin," he said. She glanced sideways. "What did you tell them?" "I said no, but I didn't like how it felt." The quiet stretched out long and still. Somewhere in the barn, a horse shifted and an owl called from the trees. "Do you want it to be different?" she asked. He nodded once, slow. "I don't want to take anything from you," she said. "Not your land, not your past. I just want something steady. For them, for me." "You ain't taking. You're giving something back I thought I lost." She didn't move toward him. "Not yet." But she didn't turn away either. "I don't know what it looks like," she said, starting again. "Neither do I," he said, "but I figure we'll learn." They stood there, not touching, not speaking, while the wind carried the smell of turned soil and old smoke across the field. And in that silence there was a kind of promise, not spoken, not sealed, but felt. The next morning she found a locket on the kitchen shelf. Not new. A little tarnished. Inside was a faded photo of a woman with Wes's eyes and a blank spot where the other half should go. She didn't say a word, just tucked it into the tin box where she kept thread and matches and the birth papers of her children. It was not a wedding, not a vow, but it was the beginning of staying. By midsummer, the fields turned green with promise. Crops that once seemed like guesses now pushed through the soil with purpose. The chickens fattened. The cow gave milk again. The children grew brown from the sun and strong from work. Laughter returned, not loud or often, but enough to break the silence in all the right places. She caught herself humming once, while kneading bread, and stopped short, surprised by her own sound. The girl with the ribbon collection May the 5th had made a crown of dandelions and set it on her head without asking. She let it sit there. Wes kept his distance where it counted, gave her space to lead. But they moved together now naturally, like they'd been doing it for years. When the well jammed, he fetched her. When the fence came down in a windstorm, she was already there with wire. At night they sat near the fire, close but not crowded, passing quiet between them like something sacred. Then the letter came. It arrived by stage, folded crisp, with the return mark of her husband's brother in Sioux City. She stared at the seal a long time before opening it. Wes didn't ask. He just stood in the doorway while she read. She read it twice. "His people heard about what happened," she said finally, voice flat. "They're offering to take the children. 2 of them at least. The older boys. Said they've got room to work on the farm. Better chance maybe." She didn't look at Wes. She looked at the fire, at the way the flames cracked around the logs. "They think I'm not enough," she said. "That I've done what I can and should let go." Wes crossed his arms. His face didn't change, but his voice dropped low. "What do you think?" She didn't answer right away. "I think I don't want to lose them," she said. "I think I'm tired of people assuming I will." That night she sat up long after the others were asleep, the letter folded tight in her fist. Wes didn't come inside until nearly midnight, his boots muddy, his coat damp with sweat. He didn't say where he'd been. She didn't ask. In the morning the letter was gone. She found it in the stove, curled to ash. He didn't apologize. Neither did she. Later that week a rider came down the road, a stranger in a fine coat with boots too clean for this part of the world. He carried a clipboard and wore an expression like he'd just sniffed something foul. "I'm here to check on the children," he said. Why was asked, already hardening. Because a report was made, the man replied. About their conditions. About abandonment. "We have procedures." She stepped forward, then her voice cold and clear. "Did the report come from Sioux City?" The man didn't answer. "Just asked to see the house." She let him. Showed him the beds, the clean floors, the garden, the bucket of milk, the school books by the window, the ribbons tied to the fence post. He scribbled and sniffed and frowned, but said nothing else. By sunset he was gone. The dust of his horse lingered longer than he did. That night was poured her coffee and leaned on the counter. "I won't let them take them," he said. "They're not yours to fight for." "They are if you're mine." She stared at him, breath shallow. "I didn't ask for that," she whispered. "I know," he said, "but I'm offering it." She turned the cup in her hands, fingers twitching like she wanted to hold something but didn't know what. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore," he said. Silence again. But it wasn't the kind that cut. It was the kind that held. She let the cup go, stepped closer, and laid her forehead against his chest. His hand stayed at his sides a long moment before rising, slow and careful, to her back. The next morning he hitched the wagon and took her and the children into town. They signed papers. Not for custody or separation or land, but for a license, a choice, one she made with both hands. When they returned, the sky was wide and clean, and the wind blew soft through the tall grass. She walked into the house with a ring tied to a string around her neck. Not gold, just braided leather, but it held. That night she moved the tin box from the barn to the shelf beside the hearth. Her children slept in rooms with names on the doors. Wes sat beside her as the fire crackled low. Outside, the wind, carried the smell of rain, but the roof held steady. Inside, so did they. By autumn, the land had ripened and begun its slow retreat. The fields gave back what they could squash, thick and heavy beans tangled in vines, potatoes dug up by small, eager hands. They stored what they could, dried the rest, and lined the shelves with jars of what they'd made together. There was pride in it, not loud or boastful, just quiet satisfaction that came from doing what needed doing and doing it well. She taught May to stitch a hem straight, even when her hands itched to run outside. The boys learned to mend a fence post without being asked. Was carved them a toy horse out of scrap wood, smoothing the edges so no splinters would catch. It wasn't a house filled with riches, but it held more than it ever had: noise, purpose, breath. One evening, she found him out near the tree line, staring at the creek where the ground had begun to harden again. "You come out here often?" she asked. He nodded. "She's buried just down that slope. My first wife." She didn't speak, just stood beside him. "I used to come here to talk to her, tell her what I was doing even if there wasn't much to say. And now, I just sit." He paused. "Sometimes I feel her less than I used to." "That means she's gone." "No. I think it means she knows I'm not." She looked out across the water to where the trees caught the last of the sun. "I haven't talked to him in months. Not even in my head." "That mean you're done missing him?" She shook her head. "It means the missing isn't the biggest thing in me anymore." He reached for her hand, then just once, firm and sure. She didn't flinch. Their fingers locked, worn and rough with work still under their nails. When the first snow came, it came heavy, all in one night. The barn groaned under the weight of it. The children shouted when they saw it, throwing open the door barefoot and wild, until she scolded them back in for coats. Wes chopped wood till his shoulders gave out. She simmered stew until the whole house smelled like onions and thyme. The world outside was white, endless, and clean, but inside they were warm. Later, by the fire, she sat with her mending and the baby curled against her hip. Was read aloud from an old book with pages soft from use. The older boys played checkers on the floor, arguing about rules they both bent. She looked around that room and saw what she had made, not alone, not by force, but through every hard mile and quiet choice. "This is ours now," she said, more to herself than anyone else. Was hurt it anyway. He reached over and touched the locket at her neck, the one with space still open inside. "You want me in there?" he asked, voice low. She looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded. "Yes." He didn't smile, just leaned forward and kissed her cheek once, like it had always belonged to him. That night, before the fire burned down and the children were tucked in deep, she wrote a letter. Not to the family in Sioux City, not to the government man, just to herself. She wrote, "We stayed, we planted, we built, we survived, then we began." She folded it small, tucked it into the tin with the papers and the bits of ribbon. It didn't need to be read again. The house creaked in the wind. The snow piled against the windows. And still the warmth held. The story rides on. Subscribe and don't miss it.